I could feel his eyes on me the moment I walked through those glass doors. The way he looked up from restocking shelves, that slow smile spreading across his face like he'd been waiting for me specifically. My heart skipped, and I told myself it was nothing, just polite customer service. But when our eyes met across the produce section, something electric passed between us that had nothing to do with shopping. Before we dive deeper into this, hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying where this is heading. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I hadn't planned on stopping by the store that afternoon, but Kurt was working late again, another emergency call that would keep him busy until well past dinner. 39 years old, married for 15 years, and I was spending another evening alone with leftover takeout and whatever was on Netflix. The routine had become suffocating, predictable in the worst possible way. The grocery store was nearly empty at 4 in the afternoon, that quiet lull between the lunch rush and the after-work crowd. I grabbed a basket more out of habit than necessity, wandering the aisles without any real purpose. That's when I noticed him. Austin, according to his name tag, looked to be in his late 20s, with sandy brown hair that fell just right across, his forehead and green eyes that seemed to take in everything. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of lean build that suggested he spent time outdoors rather than behind a desk. When he smiled at me, it wasn't the practiced politeness most retail workers perfected. This was genuine, warm, interested. Finding everything okay? He asked, approaching with a confidence that caught me off guard. Just browsing, I replied, suddenly aware of how I must look. I'd thrown on jeans and a fitted sweater before leaving the house. Nothing special, but the way his gaze lingered made me feel like I was wearing something far more attention-grabbing. Well, if you need any recommendations, I know this place pretty well. His voice carried a slight southern drawl that I found unexpectedly appealing. Been working here 3 years, and I've tried most of what we carry. We started talking about nothing important, weekend plans, the weather, his college courses. But underneath the mundane conversation, something else was building. The way he leaned slightly closer when I spoke, how his fingers brushed mine, when he handed me a sample of cheese, the fact that he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. "You seem different," he said after we'd been chatting for nearly 20 minutes, his voice dropping lower. "Most people rush through here, like they're checking items off a list. You actually seem to be enjoying yourself." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Maybe I am." "Good," he said, that smile returning. "Life's too short not to enjoy the simple things." There was something in the way he said it, a suggestion that hung in the air between us. I found myself wondering what he meant by simple things, my mind, wandering to possibilities I had no business considering. "Actually," Austin continued, glancing around the nearly empty store, "I was about to take my break. There's something in the back I wanted to show you. We just got in some specialty items that aren't on the shelves yet. Might be exactly what you're looking for." The rational part of my mind knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about specialty items or inventory, but the lonely wife in me, the woman who couldn't remember the last time someone looked at her the way Austin was looking at me, nodded before I could think better of it. "Lead the way," I heard myself say. The stockroom was dimly lit, filled with towers of boxes and the familiar smell of cardboard and cleaning supplies. Austin closed the door behind us, not locking it, but creating a barrier between us and the rest of the world. The space suddenly felt intimate, charged with an energy that made my pulse quicken. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what did you want to show me?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something clean and masculine that made me want to lean in. "Honestly, I just wanted to talk to you without half the store watching." My breath caught. "Austin." "I know," he said softly. "I saw your ring. I'm not trying to cause trouble. There's something about you. The way you carry yourself, the way you actually listen when people talk. It's been a long time since I met someone like that." His honesty was disarming. Most men in his position would have made some crude proposition or tried to play games. But Austin was being real with me, and that authenticity was more seductive than any pickup line. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered, but I didn't move away. "Probably not," he agreed, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from my face. "But you are." The touch was gentle, questioning, giving me every opportunity to step back. Instead, I found myself leaning into it, my eyes closing briefly at the, contact. When I opened them, he was watching me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a murmur. "Things I shouldn't be thinking about," I admitted. His thumb traced along my cheek, and I felt my resolve crumbling. It had been so long since someone touched me like this, like I was precious, like I was desired. Kurt and I had fallen into a routine where physical contact was perfunctory at best, an obligation fulfilled rather than a connection shared. "Sometimes," Austin said, stepping even closer, We deserve to think about things we shouldn't. The space between us disappeared as he leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in the softest whisper of contact. It was barely a kiss, more of a question, and I answered by pressing closer, my hands finding the front of his shirt. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, as if he was giving me time to change my mind. But I didn't want to change my mind. I wanted to lose myself in this moment, in the feeling of being wanted by someone who looked at me like I was the most interesting thing in his world. His hands settled on my waist, warm and steady, while mine tangled in his hair. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and I found myself melting against him in ways I'd forgotten were possible. God, he breathed against my lips. You're incredible. The compliment sent warmth spreading through my entire body. When was the last time Kurt had called me incredible? When was the last time he'd looked at me like Austin was looking at me now? His mouth moved to my neck, placing soft kisses along the column of my throat. I tilted my head back, giving him better access, a soft sound escaping my lips. His hands traced along my sides, respectful but confident, making me feel alive in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. We could get caught, I whispered, though the thought only seemed to heighten the excitement coursing through me. Not if we're careful, he replied, his lips finding that sensitive spot just below my ear that made me shiver. His hands moved to the hem of my sweater, fingers skimming underneath to touch bare skin. The contact sent electricity through me, my body responding instantly to his touch. I hadn't realized how starved I'd been for this kind of attention until it was being offered so freely. Tell me to stop, he murmured against my ear, and I will. Right now. But stopping was the furthest thing from my mind. Instead, I pulled his face back to mine, kissing him with a passion that surprised us both. He responded immediately, his control slipping as he pressed me back against a stack of boxes, his body warm and solid against mine. His hands explored with increasing confidence, tracing patterns that had me gasping softly into his mouth. I could feel his heart racing against my chest, matching the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. This was madness, but it was the most alive I'd felt in years. You're so beautiful, he whispered, his hands framing my face as he looked into my eyes. So incredibly beautiful. The sincerity in his voice nearly undid me. I reached for the buttons of his work shirt, needing to feel more of him, needing to eliminate the barriers between us. He didn't stop me, instead helping me push the fabric from his shoulders. His chest was firm and warm under my palms, and I could feel him shudder at my touch. The power of affecting him so strongly was intoxicating. I traced my fingers along the lines of muscle, marveling at the way his breath hitched with each caress. I want you, I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Are you sure? He asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. Instead of answering with words, I kissed him again, pouring all my longing and frustration into the contact. He understood immediately, his hands moving to my jeans, slowly working them open while I did the same with his. The anticipation was almost unbearable as layers disappeared between us. Each piece of clothing that fell away brought us closer to a line I'd never imagined crossing, but every touch made it easier to push those thoughts aside. When he lifted me onto a sturdy stack of boxes, positioning himself between my legs, I felt a moment of clarity about what we were about to do. This wasn't just physical attraction, it was a desperate need for connection, for feeling desired and appreciated. Look at me, he said softly, his hands steady on my thighs. I met his gaze, seeing my own hunger reflected in his green eyes. There was no judgment there, no pressure, just pure desire and appreciation for this moment we were creating together. When he joined with me, it was with a gentleness that made my eyes well up unexpectedly. He moved slowly at first, letting me adjust, his forehead resting against mine as we breathed together. Okay, he whispered. More than okay, I managed, my voice catching slightly. He began to move then, setting a rhythm that had me clinging to his shoulders. Every motion sent waves of sensation through me, reminding me of pleasures I'd almost forgotten existed. His lips found mine again, swallowing the soft sounds I couldn't contain. The boxes beneath me creaked slightly with our movement, adding an element of urgency to our encounter. We were exposed here, vulnerable to discovery, but that only seemed to intensify everything we were feeling. So perfect, he murmured against my throat, his pace increasing slightly. You feel so perfect. His words sent me higher, my body responding to both his touch and his voice. I could feel tension building inside me, a familiar warmth spreading outward from where we were connected. It had been so long since I'd felt this way, so long since someone had taken the time to really make me feel cherished. My fingers dug into his back as the sensation intensified, my body moving instinctively with his. He seemed to understand exactly what I needed, adjusting his angle and pressure until I was gasping his name. "That's it," he encouraged, his voice rough with his own need. "Let go for me." The encouragement was exactly what I needed. The tension that had been building finally crested, washing over me in waves that left me trembling in his arms. He followed moments later, his body tensing against mine as he reached his own completion. For several long moments, we stayed frozen, like that, catching our breath, processing what had just happened between us. The reality of the situation began to seep back in slowly. The storage room, the store beyond the door, my marriage, the ring still sitting on my finger. "Hey, Austin," said softly, sensing my thoughts shifting. "Don't regret this, please." I looked up at him, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. "I don't," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "I should, but I don't." He smiled at that, reaching up to smooth my hair back into place. "Good, because I definitely don't." We separated reluctantly, both of us aware that we needed to return to reality. As we retrieved our scattered clothing, I found myself stealing glances at him, memorizing the way he moved, the way he looked at me like I was something precious. "My shift ends at 9, he said quietly as we finished getting dressed. "If you ever want to talk, or anything else." I knew I should say no, should tell him this was a one-time mistake that could never happen again, but instead I found myself nodding, accepting the slip of paper with his number that he pressed into my hand. "I should go," I said, though leaving was the last thing I wanted to do. "I know," he replied. "But Rebecca." The sound of my name on his lips sent another shiver through me. "Yeah? This doesn't have to be the end of anything. It could be the beginning." I left the store in a daze, my body still humming from our encounter. The drive home passed in a blur, my mind replaying every moment, every touch, every word he'd spoken to me. Kurt was already home when I walked through the front door, sitting in his recliner with a beer and the evening news. He glanced up briefly as I entered. "Where have you been?" he asked, his attention already returning to the television. "Just ran some errands," I replied, amazed at how normal my voice sounded. "How was your day?" "Long," he grunted. "Mrs. Patterson's water heater decided to flood her basement. Took 6 hours to get it sorted." I nodded sympathetically, but my mind was elsewhere. While he'd been dealing with water heaters, I'd been discovering parts of myself I'd thought were dormant. The contrast was stark, and more than a little unsettling. "I'm going to take a shower," I announced. Kurt mumbled, not really listening. Under the hot spray, I let myself think about Austin's hands on my skin, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. The memory made my body respond all over again, a warmth that had nothing to do with the water temperature. I tried to tell myself it was just physical, just a moment of weakness that I'd gotten out of my system. But even as I formed the thought, I knew it wasn't true. There had been something deeper happening in that storage room, a connection that went beyond simple attraction. That night, lying next to my snoring husband, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Austin's parting words. This could be the beginning. The beginning of what? An affair? The end of my marriage? A completely different life? I pulled out my phone, his number glowing on the screen. My finger hovered over the call button for long minutes before I finally put the device away. But I didn't delete the number. I couldn't bring myself to do that. The next few days passed in a strange haze. I went through the motions of my regular routine, cleaning house, running errands, making dinner for a husband who barely acknowledged my presence. But underneath it all, Austin's touch burned in my memory, making every mundane task feel surreal. I found myself driving past the store twice, each time fighting the urge to go inside. What would I say to him? What did I want from him? The questions swirled in my mind without clear answers. On Thursday evening, as Kurt channel surfed through another predictable night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Been thinking about you. Hope you're okay." My heart raced as I read the simple message. Just knowing he was thinking about me sent warmth spreading through my chest. I typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on, "Thinking about you too." His reply came quickly. "Would love to see you again. When can we talk?" I glanced at Kurt, completely absorbed in a fishing show, then back at my phone. "Tomorrow afternoon? I'll be there." The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I changed clothes 3 times, unable to decide what message I wanted to send. Finally, I settled on a sundress that made me feel confident without being too obvious. Austin was waiting by the customer service desk when I arrived, his face lighting up the moment he saw me. The genuine happiness in his expression made my knees weak. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi yourself." We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Then he gestured toward the back of the store. "Break time?" I asked. Actually, I was thinking somewhere else. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down, more private. I hesitated for just a moment before nodding. This was moving beyond stolen moments in storage rooms into something that felt more intentional, more real. But I found I wanted that reality, even if it terrified me. The coffee shop was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. We chose a corner table away from the few other customers, the distance creating an intimate bubble around us. I wasn't sure you'd come, Austin admitted once we'd settled with our drinks. I wasn't sure either, I replied honestly. I keep telling myself this is crazy. Maybe it is, he said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. But maybe crazy isn't always bad. The simple contact sent familiar electricity up my arm. How did he do that? How did such a simple touch affect me so powerfully? Tell me about yourself, I said, needing to know more about this man who'd turned my world upside down. I mean, really tell me. What do you want out of life? For the next hour, we talked like old friends reuniting after years apart. He told me about his marketing degree, his plans to open his own business, his love of hiking and photography. I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about in years. My abandoned dreams of teaching, my love of reading, the creative writing. I'd given up when I got married. You should start writing again, he said when I mentioned it. I bet you're incredible at it. How could you possibly know that? I laughed. Because you see things differently than most people. The way you notice details, the way you listen. Writers need that kind of awareness. It was such a simple observation, but coming from him, it felt like validation I'd been craving for years. Kurt had never shown any interest in my creative pursuits, dismissing them as impractical hobbies. What about your marriage? Austin asked gently. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I could lie, pretend everything was fine, maintain the fiction that I was just a woman having a momentary lapse in judgment. But something about Austin's steady gaze made me want to be honest. No, I said quietly. I don't think I have been for a long time. We've just been going through the motions. He nodded slowly, not judging, just accepting my truth. That must be lonely. It is, I admitted, feeling tears threaten unexpectedly. God, it really is. He squeezed my hand gently. You don't have to be lonely anymore. The simple statement carried so much weight, so many possibilities. I looked into his green eyes and saw sincerity there, not just desire, but genuine caring. This man barely knew me, but he seemed to see me in ways my husband of 15 years had forgotten how to do. What are you suggesting? I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. I'm suggesting that life is short, and happiness isn't guaranteed. Sometimes you have to reach for it, even when it's complicated. His thumb traced across my knuckles, the gentle motion making it hard to think clearly. Everything about this felt dangerous and wonderful and completely necessary. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, he replied immediately. I don't want you to feel pressured. Just don't think so much that you talk yourself out of something that could be amazing. When we parted that afternoon, he kissed my cheek softly, the contact sending warmth through my entire body. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with possibilities and consequences in equal measure. That weekend, I watched Kurt from across the breakfast table as he read the paper in silence, the same way he'd done every Saturday for the past decade. He didn't ask about my week, didn't notice that I'd gotten my hair trimmed, didn't seem to register my presence at all unless he needed something. The contrast with Austin's attention was stark and painful. In one afternoon, Austin had shown more interest in my thoughts and dreams than Kurt had in months. Was it fair to compare them? Was it fair to want more than this comfortable, predictable existence? Sunday evening, I made my decision. I texted Austin, "When do you work next?" His response came within minutes. Tuesday afternoon. Does that work? It works perfectly. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the morning cleaning house with nervous energy, changing clothes twice before settling on jeans and a blouse that Austin had complimented before. When I walked into the store, my heart was racing with anticipation and determination. He was helping a customer when I arrived, but his eyes found mine immediately across the store. The smile that spread across his face was worth every moment of uncertainty I'd experienced. "I'll be with you in just a minute," he called out, and I nodded, wandering the aisles while I waited. When he finally approached, there was something different in his expression, hope mixed with caution, as if he wasn't sure what my presence meant. "So," he said simply. "So," I echoed. "I've been thinking." And, instead of answering immediately, I stepped closer to him, close enough to smell his cologne, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "And I think you're right about reaching for happiness," I said quietly. "Even when it's complicated." The relief that washed over his features was unmistakable. "Are you sure? Because once we go down this road—" "I'm sure," I interrupted. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." He glanced around the store, noting the few customers scattered throughout the aisles. My break's in 20 minutes. There's a park about 10 minutes from here, more private than last time. I nodded, understanding. This was no longer about stolen moments in storage rooms. This was about making a conscious choice to pursue something that could change everything. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on a bench in the small neighborhood park, watching Austin walk toward me with that confident stride that had first caught my attention. He sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched, the simple contact sending familiar warmth through me. I need you to understand something, he said, turning to face me fully. This isn't just physical for me. I know that's how it started, but talking to you the other day, there's something deeper here. I feel it too, I admitted. That's what scares me. Why does it scare you? Because I don't know where this leads. Because my life is complicated. Because I don't want to hurt anyone, but I also can't seem to stay away from you. He reached for my hand, threading our fingers together. What if we just take it one day at a time? No pressure, no expectations beyond what feels right in the moment. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. No need to figure out the entire future right now, just permission to explore whatever this was between us. Okay, I said softly. One day at a time. He smiled then, that brilliant expression that made my heart skip. Good, because I have a confession to make. What's that? I've been thinking about kissing you again since the moment you left the store last week. Just thinking about it, I teased, feeling more relaxed than I had in days. Well, he said, leaning closer, I've been hoping for the opportunity to do more than think about it. When his lips met mine, it was with none of the hesitancy of our first kiss. This was confident, sure, full of promise. I melted into him, my free hand finding the back of his neck, holding him close. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, as if we were savoring the knowledge that this wasn't stolen time, that we'd chosen to be here together. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing heavily. God, you're addictive, he murmured against my forehead. Right back at you, I replied, amazed at my own boldness. We spent the next hour just talking and stealing kisses when no one else was around. He told me about his apartment, his photography hobby, his dreams of traveling. I found myself sharing stories about college, about the person I'd been before marriage settled into routine. I want to see your photographs, I said when he mentioned a series he'd taken of local architecture. Really? They're nothing special. I bet they are. I bet you see things in ways other people miss. The compliment made him beam, and I realized how good it felt to build someone up instead of just going through motions. Maybe next time, he said, if you want there to be a next time. I definitely want there to be a next time, I said without hesitation. When we parted that afternoon, it was with plans to meet again later in the week. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Was I making a mistake? Possibly. Was I risking everything? Probably. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt alive. That evening, Kurt barely looked up when I walked through the door. He was absorbed in some home improvement show, a beer sweating on the table. Beside him, the contrast with Austin's attention was more stark than ever. How was your day? I asked, partly out of habit and partly to test whether he'd engage. Fine, he grunted. Yours? Good, I replied. Really good, actually. But he wasn't listening anymore, his attention already back on the television. I stood there for a moment, watching this man I'd shared 15 years with, and felt nothing but a vague sadness for what we'd lost. In the kitchen, I started dinner while my mind wandered to Austin's laugh. The way he'd looked at me like I was fascinating. The way he'd asked questions and actually listened to my answers. The differences were becoming impossible to ignore. My phone buzzed with a text. Thank you for today. Can't wait to see you again. I smiled as I typed back, thank you for making me feel alive again. His response came immediately. That's just the beginning. As I finished preparing a meal Kurt would eat in distracted silence, I found myself believing Austin's words. Maybe this was just the beginning of something wonderful. Maybe I deserved to feel desired and appreciated. Maybe one day at a time was exactly the right approach. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. I'd meet Austin whenever his schedule allowed, sometimes at the park, sometimes at the coffee shop, once at a small bookstore across town where he'd insisted on buying me a notebook for my writing. Each meeting deepened whatever was growing between us. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our fears, our dreams for the future. He encouraged my writing, asked thoughtful questions about my ideas, made me feel like my creativity mattered. The physical attraction remained intense, but it was layered now with emotional connection that made every touch more meaningful. When he kissed me, I felt cherished. When he held my hand, I felt seen. When he looked at me, I felt beautiful in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Meanwhile, my marriage continued its slow fade. Kurt and I spoke less each day, our conversations limited to logistics and necessities. He didn't seem to notice my new energy, my improved mood, the way I'd started paying more attention to my appearance. One Thursday evening, as we sat in our usual silence after dinner, Kurt's phone rang. Another emergency call. Another evening alone. As he gathered his tools, I felt relief instead of disappointment. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. "This could take hours." After he left, I found myself reaching for my phone, typing without really thinking. "Kurt's working late. Are you free?" Austin's response came quickly. "Give me 30 minutes. When he arrived at my front door, the reality of what I was doing hit me fully. I was inviting another man into my home, into the space I shared with my husband. It was a line I'd never imagined crossing. "You sure about this?" Austin asked, seeming to sense my sudden nerves. "Yes," I said, though my voice shook slightly. "I need this. I need you." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the significance of the moment hanging heavy between us. "Come here," he said softly. I went to him without hesitation, melting into his arms like I belonged there. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as I responded, my body coming alive under his touch. "I've missed you," he murmured against my lips. "I've missed you too," I replied, surprised by how true it was. In just a few weeks, he'd become essential to my happiness in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. "Show me your house. Show me your world." So I did. I led him through rooms that suddenly felt different with him in them, spaces that had been merely functional now charged with new energy. When we reached my bedroom, we both paused at the threshold. "We don't have to," he said quietly. "I want to," I replied, and I meant it completely. What happened next was tender and passionate and completely different from the hurried encounter in the storage room. Austin took his time, exploring my body like he was memorizing every inch, making me feel worshipped in ways I'd never experienced. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets that had never held such contentment, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. When he traced patterns on my bare shoulder, I felt more connected to another human being than I had in years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked when I'd been quiet for several minutes. "How different this feels," I said honestly. "How different you make me feel." "Different how?" "Seen, appreciated, like I matter for more than what I can do for someone else." He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "You matter, Rebecca. You matter so much." The simple words made my eyes well up unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had told me I mattered? When was the last time I'd felt it was true? We had 3 beautiful hours together before reality intruded in the form of Kurt's headlights in the driveway. Austin dressed quickly while I threw on a robe, both of us moving with practiced efficiency born of necessity. "The back door," I whispered, leading him through the kitchen. He paused at the threshold, pulling me close for one more kiss. "I love you," he said quietly. The words hung in the air long after he disappeared into the darkness, 3 simple syllables that changed everything. "I love you too," I thought, but didn't say. The words felt too big, too important, too dangerous to speak aloud. But as I heard Kurt's key in the front door, I knew they were true. What happens when you find yourself falling for someone who sees you in ways your own husband has forgotten? When passion awakens parts of yourself you thought were lost forever? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Thanks for being here with me on this journey.